This episode of The Watch is brought to you by Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate has been searching the globe for flavors that pair perfectly with coffee. So when they heard the new season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus, was set in Thailand, they were inspired to brew up 2 new flavored creamers, Thai iced coffee and pina colada flavored creamers. They're available for a short time only, so for the love of coffee, go try them now.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk, now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me in the studio, he is social realism. It's Andy Greenwald! There's like not a single funny thing to say about Adolescence or the Pitt, which is what we're talking about today. Greenwald, it's great to see you.
You could have said something about like how I used to wear a wig and dance.
And dance to Aha. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's awesome to be here on a Wednesday, recording for a Thursday.
We're a little early.
This episode's going to go out after the most recent episode of The Pitt. I think we're gonna wait on Severance till next week. We'll do that with White Lotus. I know we promised the streets a Philly TV podcast. I think you've watched Deli Boys. I've watched Deli Boys. I checked out Dope Thief. We have plenty of stuff to say about him. We're just going to save it for a little bit later because honestly, man, Adolescence demands a deeper dive.
Yes, and we are recording a day early because of some travel, so we couldn't give Severance or Top Chef the proper space.
I think Top Chef will be fine. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep an eye on it. And it's been a very busy time for me.
Oh.
Because, first of all, let me do a little bit of housekeeping.
Yeah, do it.
We can watch us on the Ringer YouTube or on Spotify on the Watch feed. You can follow us on Instagram at thewatchpod_. on Instagram. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times, some of the fun stuff you see on that feed, it's done by Kaya McMullen, who I wanted to shout out, worked on Good Hang with Amy Poehler.
I'm so jealous.
First 2 episodes dropped, Martin Short and Tina Fey. They were excellent. Kaya, Juliet, Mal, I think Alea worked on it over from the Ringer team. So I just want to shout out everybody from our squad who worked on that with the Amy Poehler crew. And it's a really fun pod. You should subscribe and check it out. Yeah, I just wanted to say shout out to Kaya. You can email us at thewatch@spotify.com if you want to ask us about
Kaya,
gauze and bracelets and stuff. And Kaya, I was a little bit busy yesterday. I was watching a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the JFK papers dropped.
Oh, I was wondering how you felt about this.
It's a little bit overwhelming because it's like, as I was texting with Klosterman and Bill, no big deal.
Jesus Christ.
And it's
the conspiracy boys.
A lot longer than the Warren report. I'm reading a pretty cool interview right now between the Justice Department or whoever's doing this interview and a former CIA agent. And this is taking place in the 70s. And he seems to have his fingers in a lot of pots. So enjoying random, I'm going on Reddit. Reddit's like, this one's good. This one's good. This one's good.
I think I just want to make this make sense for people listening who
Trump
might not.
Trump released all the JFK papers. That's the headline. Yeah,
I know,
and so, I'm not like.
So you're getting good return on your vote. So congratulations on that.
If he's gonna fucking send us straight into the mountainside, I am getting my JFK papers out of it.
I just was curious.
Yeah.
I knew what was happening in the news. Not really, but you'd let me know.
Yeah,
the major
just now
points. Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Is this like, because you're like, oh, this is a lot longer than the Warren report. This reminds me.
I haven't read the Warren report.
I know you'll read the much longer unredacted files. This reminds me of when you were caping up for the Ridley Scott edit of Kingdom of Heaven.
I'm not done caping. The cape's still on.
Right. I'm saying
it's
like
invisible, but it's here right now.
I could watch this reasonable length edited film, or I could just watch the
director's cut is way better.
I know. And so what you're saying in this version, Earl Warren is like the Harvey Scissorhands of truth-telling.
Yes, and the deep state is Ridley Scott.
Yes.
And they were like, we have so much more to tell you.
We have so much more to share.
It's one of my passions. I'm just really curious about what happened there.
Now I'm trying to figure out a version of this where Earl Warren is asking Julia Stiles to dance on a table to distract people from the CIA implication, but I've gotten a little galaxy brain here.
But there's a ton of really good TV on right now. And
just a ton of really good facts. So you've got nothing new to share. You've just been going in this.
It would be speculation at this point.
Oh, well, a podcast is certainly not the right venue for idle speculation. It is.
There's what's cool about it is looking at all the PDFs and seeing all of the different just sort of tactile, even though you can't touch it on a PDF, like the very tactile feeling of the written reports of this guy came into a consulate and said that, Lee Harvey Oswald is doing this in a scene or whatever. And it's like all the stuff, the interconnected nature of all these offices and, it being like this note that's on the bottom of a guy's pile that might have changed the world. It's like,
that's cool.
Yeah. I just like it as like, and also, I mean, just if you're just like wanting to read about espionage, for better or for worse, and just are curious about that kind of thing, it's in there.
This might be one of the, we're generally aligned. And I know that we've been told by the higher ups that agreeing on everything is podcast gold.
Do you disagree that the assassination of Kennedy was important?
No, from everything I've been told by you about the news that it is important. But no, but I do not share your curiosity and passion.
What are you curious about these days?
I mean, I was explaining to Kaya how I'm newly curious about Sephora and navigating its aisles in pursuit of skincare greatness for my suddenly activated daughter.
Yeah.
Who's very interested in those things. On the topic of...
I fuck with a Sephora. I go in there, grab a little drunken elephant.
Do you?
Yeah. How do you think I look like I'm 42, don't I?
You look so young. You look great. Yeah. Oh, I was saying to Kaya that like, and to my daughters that like there are two places that affect me the way like a Faraday cage affects our phones.
Yeah.
Those are Sephora and the Container Store. I walk into those places and I cannot.
Sephora is truly a language of its own.
Yeah.
The aisles are narrow. The stuff seems to be laid out completely randomly. And then the line for Sephora, now that it is so big with like preteens and the TikTok generation, everybody, and we're going to talk about the TikTok generation.
Okay.
I'm just like, where do you guys, how is this now like a 60-person line that starts over in the left-hand, like Augustus Badur section? Like, I don't.
Listen to you. God, you just have a secret life. I love it. How do you still have layers to unpeel like an onion? All I was going to say about the Kennedy assassination was, for me, like, Charles McCarry's great novel, Tears of Autumn, that you introduced me to as well. That's my JFK assassination.
You
know
think
what I
mean? That's how it went down?
No, I actually have no opinion how it went down. I enjoy the fictional narrative that seems reasonable.
Yeah, that's where this comes from.
That's good enough
Libra,
for me.
American Tabloid,
right.
Tears of Autumn. Those are the three big ones for me. And then obviously also Oliver Stone's JFK. But then I just really, all the different like kind of tentacles that come out of it. It's like the spider web of like the 1960s and early 70s and the CIA and the government and I don't know.
That's your Spider-Verse.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
You go to Sephora too. How do you find the time?
Well, I don't go to Sephora if we're walking by a Sephora and my wife is like, I need to stop into Sephora. I'm like, I'll go. I don't care.
Do you want to go with my older daughter? Because I think she needs.
I don't
the
know
help
if I have the answers for her. So today we're going to talk about the Pitt and Adolescence. I was curious on a broad level, how it feels for you to be watching shows of this level of intensity. I think I fancy myself as something of an adrenaline junkie when it comes to my filmed content, but I was curious for you, Denzian of the Midnight Diner that you are, just kind of like, I just like it's low and slow. Just people talking. It's okay.
Yeah, I like my entertainment.
I don't need extra gunshot wounds.
I like my entertainment the way I like my brisket, is what you're saying.
I mean, how are you feeling? And also, I think as we've been in Severance country for the last 2 months, basically, and talked about Daredevil, talked about a bunch of different things. These are very realistic shows. These are very like of the moment shows.
Well, first of all, let me say that hopefully like any person in life, apparently I can change. And it's not just because, thanks to my almost 12-year-old daughter's suggestion of some toner and some moisturizer, it's not just because I now smell like matcha. My upper face area. You forget that not even 5 weeks ago, I was sitting in this chair saying, boy, I really did just watch 6 hours of American Primeval. Like,
that's true.
There is something shifting within me. And
I got some amazing PDFs for you when you're ready to jump in the deep end.
I mean, isn't it nice to never settle?
Yeah.
Maybe I like something different. I think both of these shows are I think I over-indexed in one direction. Okay, like I definitely think that on description, both of these shows I expected to have issues with or to struggle with, and it's been absolutely the reverse. We can parse the details as to why that might be, but I have found like this experience. We're getting to talk about when we're talking about Adolescence entirely in its entirety because I watched the whole thing since we last recorded 36 hours ago or whatever that was, and we are talking about tonight, and if this goes up Thursday's episode of The Pitt. So we are going to be talking about two of not just the most intense episodes of the year.
Sure.
But two of the very best episodes of the year that I imagine we'll be talking about in December. So it's not just that it's the adrenaline, it is the absolute
craftsmanship
and the absolute sterling quality of them. Also, let me just say that you know this, like I had a long day yesterday, pulled in a lot of directions, and the last thing on my list to tick off was The Pitt. And I had to watch it in a way that I do not recommend watching a show, which is after putting one's children to bed when one is already feeling a little bit sleepy.
Yeah.
This was the antidote to that. Like to know that what I was going to watch was going to be so viscerally thrilling and engaging that there would be not only no threat of sleep, no threat of second screen, no threat of distraction, like to be dialed in in the dumbest possible way, a cheat code for the glut of television opportunities and television choices that we have right now. The cheat code might be make really, really riveting shit and we'll pay attention. Now, that can result in some bad work, but
for sure.
It's not a bad zag considering how ponderous a lot of the other prestige television these days can be.
I have enjoyed, to the relative to the world of The Pitt, the mundane episodes of The Pitt, the episodes of The Pitt that are just kind of like we're kind of trying to get through this hour, or here's some interpersonal dynamics between the doctors. This was obviously the beginning of an...
Can I stop you quickly?
Sure.
Only because I'm sorry. I was just picturing some of our listeners like that meme where the guy is sweating with his finger hovering over two buttons because we have not officially declared which show we're talking about.
I think we're going to talk about The Pitt first.
We're going to talk about The Pitt first.
And then we'll talk about the entirety of Adolescence. So there's spoilers now going forward for the most recent episode of The Pitt that's coming out on Thursday night. If you haven't watched The Pitt yet, or if you haven't watched this episode yet, feel free to skip to our spoilers conversation about Adolescence, which we will talk about how it seems like most people have watched because it has become a huge sensation.
I also, this is part of my efforts to change to not only become someone who has more bloodlust in his television viewing, but I also have decided that the lane for me in this podcast going forward, because you're the crowd favorite, is that I can be just the servicey guy. You know what I mean?
You're just going to set me up.
I'm just going to yes. I'm the other guy.
You're Bobby Hurley, just bounce pass.
I'm the other guy on the beach volleyball team.
Okay. Well, honestly, I think we could probably diagram a bunch of sequences or moments in The Pitt from this episode. As close watchers of the show would know, Pitt Fest has loomed in the background. It felt like they kept mentioning this. They kept mentioning, oh, Pitt Fest, Jake's going to Pitt Fest. Are you going to Pitt Fest? Pitt Fest is today. And look, if you've been around the block a couple of times with television, they don't throw out details and color and slice of life notes more than once unless it's going to matter. And so I think that there are two major sort of things coming to a head here. One is they have a mass casualty event. This is putting the emergency room to the absolute test. And I think also when you watch this episode, bringing out the absolute best in these people, and you kind of see why they are these people who do this in real life are truly like guardians of society, and our most like crippling moments. Like these people are here to try and keep us alive. And also, perhaps this show at its best, where all of the kinetic energy that comes along with being in that emergency room actually has a event that puts that energy to the test. And one of the things that I think is interesting to hear you note, I watched this right before bed, is because this show is so, confrontational about what it is about. It is saying like, this is what happens when this person comes in. This is how long these people have to wait in the waiting rooms. This is these doctors learning on the job. When something truly adrenalizing comes along, like a mass casualty event, I actually felt absolutely riveted, but not. I was calm. You know what I mean? I was calm watching the show. I was calm watching them zip around to different hospital beds, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It went by in a blink of an eye. This is a 40-minute episode. I think the next episode will probably be something of a part B to it.
An excruciating cut to black.
Yes.
The kind we are not really used to anymore in the streaming era.
Yeah.
Like, there was no ending point. The episode just stopped, and there's more to come.
Very well directed by Amanda Marsalis, I was just going to point out. And kind of, if you spent the first, I guess, what is it, 12 episodes? What are we on, episode 13 now?
About that.
Kind of living in these people's insecurities and anxieties and frustrations.
Mm-hmm.
Really iron sharpens iron in this episode with these characters, where Dr. Robbie, the Sean Hattasey character who comes back from the first, that's Dr.
Just Googled. Apparently it's Hatosi.
Oh, Hatosi, I'm sorry. Dr. Abbott comes back. We'd seen him
So
in the
cool.
morning. He's sort of running, he and Dr. Robbie are running the emergency room as casualties come in from this mass shooting event. And give me just sort of like the 10,000 foot view of what you thought of the episode.
Well, I'll start where we left off last week, which is the overall Jenga tower construction of this season is just stunning. And I said this last week, I'll say it again. There is a level of confidence in building something that can achieve this height in the sense that they were building it from scratch. Now, the legal teams of Michael Crichton's estate and Warner Brothers suggest that they're building it on some very well-established foundations. But regardless, when you put a character like Sean Hatosi's character in the opening moments of the first episode, you are doing what they did in many more subtle ways throughout the course of the season. You are laying down a marker for something that it's going to be meaningful, that it's going to be significant, that we're going to remember this face, that this person is going to matter, that when he shows up, when he shows up 12 hours later, essentially, we are going to feel the same sense of welcome and relief that Robbie feels in that moment. That's very hard to do. That's a confidence game. That's betting on yourselves as creators and betting on the machinery that you've built to construct a show like this, and it's betting on the audience's engagement. To feel it pay off in real time is wild. It's also truly insane.
It's also it's really good casting because Sean Hatosi is the first person we see really in this show, right?
Well,
one of the first people.
And he's a recognizable
face. So when he comes back in, you're like, it's him.
But what about the fact that this show then brings in a couple other people who are like, from the night shift, or you're going to be doing triage. And I'm like, hi, I love you. Hi. I am like a puppy at an adoption event as people walk through. I'm just so excited for the world to get bigger and to meet new people that I can trust and come to rely on. The other thing is that is so wild about this is as I was alluding to before, the log line, the pitch, for this series was, it's going to be intense, right? And so over the course of the first 10 hours, you mentioned it, there have been quieter moments, softer moments, funny moments, human moments, but it has been a really relentless, high-tempo drumbeat of intense medical
there's
stuff.
never a break for them.
What is wild is to learn that all of that was essentially batting cages compared to what is possible in terms of an event, in terms of the type of medicine that they can and are sometimes forced to do. This is a very, very probably inappropriate analogy, but there was a feeling, again, not in terms of the humanity of what's on screen, but remember all the days and weeks and months we've lost to playing Tetris, like on Nintendo 64, where you're like, this game starts slow, but give me an hour.
Nintendo 64. Must be nice.
I want to date it. Oh, here. See, no, that's not how I do. Do I do that to you?
No. I just think it's funny.
I think I get it. I think I'm a little more subtle where you're like, I had dinner at 7 p.m. His Majesty dines in darkness. Must be nice. All right, no, we'll find it. Anyway, and then it gets really, really fast, and you're like, somehow I'm still playing the same game, but it's that much harder. That was the rhythm. That was what the tempo had. That was the tempo shift in this episode. It was. I was so in it that it feels almost like churlish to be like, and then I was trying to watch the way the machinery was working. But you do think about how much, this is a teaching hospital, as they often say. Think about how much teaching happened even within the 40 minutes of this episode to get all of us on board.
And it's teaching the audience as well.
That's what I mean. Like the prep, the like, hey, everyone, this is about to happen. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's what we're going to have to be. And you feel the tension and you see the varying reactions from Dr. King being quite concerned and quite nervous to my guy Johnny Triage, who's just enjoying his Dunkachino and asking for Thanksgiving off. People process trauma in different ways, but all that is being explained to us. And then, it is anticipating our audience questions and concerns and confusion in a way that never feels manipulated. Like, wait, this is an emergency room. And we've spent 10 episodes being like, wow, they're understaffed and what's going on in the waiting room. Not only do we get the administrator, Gloria, suddenly, we see a different side of her.
Yes.
Which is great for the actor as well, because that was pretty thankless. But we also have the scenes of like, okay, the entire waiting room has to clear out now.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, this is an emergency room. Where do we go? There has to be somewhere else for them to go. The amount of thinking and planning, and I would imagine the email box that only you have access to is full of other,
You're
full
welcome to
medical
be a
professionals.
part of what we do here.
Must be nice. People saying, again.
Everybody's very complimentary towards you in the emails.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
only in the emails. That's my cousin on the boards. He don't like you very much.
I think you're great.
Anyway, it ticked off every question we might have in anticipation of asking it before the deluge hit.
Yes. Everything that happens in this episode is very much like it's the showing, not telling. They've done a lot of telling on this episode in this season of television. I think if you were going to make any critiques of the Pitt, there will be moments where they're like, well, did you know that violence against medical practitioners is X percentage higher than, and you're like, yes, that's an incredibly important thing to know. And it's plain spoken and told directly to me, but it also feels like a pop-up video bubble sometimes. This time it's all happening within the action. So, you have, when I watched this, I was like, I'm watching heroism. I'm watching superheroes, basically. These are people who are fashioning tubes and medical equipment out of basically like leftover pieces of other medical equipment. They're running short on blood, so Mel donates blood. Like they are doing things at a level of self-sacrifice and diligence. And
they are using the same device that I used to play Wordle to discover a bruised liver bleed.
Yes. Yeah. And while all this is happening, there's some TV stuff happening. First of all, as everybody will be excited to see or shocked to see, Langdon comes back just hours after being dismissed by Robbie after being discovered to have been stealing drugs from the pharmacy.
Can I make one small note?
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a petty nitpick, but I know that he did spend those hours frantically calling the desk and calling Robbie directly. I assume begging to have his job back or explain himself. It does appear that he also spent some of that time getting a haircut. Like, I think he was calling Robbie from the barber's chair.
Do you think it was like when Robbie fires him, he's like, this is actually good for me because I can get in at 4:15. And
he's like, Claudio said he had a 4:15 and I can't. He did get a little bit higher fade.
His return, I think, is supposed to speak to the absolutely catastrophic nature of what's happening.
Yeah.
That they would allow, that Robbie wouldn't be like, I can't even have, I can't have you in this emergency room no matter what.
But everything that Robbie does speaks to, everything is complementary in terms of what his point of view is, in terms of what his needs are and how he is organizing things. Because when he says to Dr. King, in a moment like this, we do not have time to do blood screenings and tests for HIV or whatever. Like, we need to get blood in
the
people.
Risk and the reward outweighs the risk.
And so that is, I assume there is some relational.
It is. I was surprised to see Langdon. I guess it's a very interesting character trait, but like, at first starts out and he's just like, I'm just here to work bodies, but then starts throwing around the classic Langdon, like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, like,
or he's like, you kids are doing great.
Yeah. Well, at first, I think Santos thinks he's going to come over and throw a fastball, like, and he's like, no, you guys are doing great.
Do you have any sense, or do we have any sense, are we meant to have any sense of the lineup for Pitt Fest 2025? Like what sort of festival it is? I did Google it. I will show you that the only Pitt Fest that I'm aware of happens in the Netherlands and features Cradle of Filth and Tribulation. So I don't think Misery Index played.
I wasn't getting a Cradle of Filth
No.
vibe. Is Gel playing Pitfest?
Gel is playing Pitfest.
But this isn't in Pittsburgh, is it?
No, this is in the Netherlands.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because I like Gel.
Well, maybe you should go and get back to us. There also is a Ramones tribute band. Anyway, I got the feeling
it was like a Chainsmokers-y kind of like fun dance pop kind of thing.
I also had the sense that it was the biggest event in Pittsburgh because it did have a wide swath of attendees, both in terms of age and background.
So the other TV thing that's happening here, not even a TV thing, but it is something that they have seeded throughout this season, is this idea that David, the disaffected incel teenager, who had originally been in the hospital with his mother had forced herself to get sick so that David would come in and perhaps she could get him some psychiatric help or whatever. He has disappeared earlier in the season, ran off. Dr. McKay has long been sort of banging the drum that they should get some cops to pick him up because he has thrown up a list of people that it would appear that he is looking to kill. They have now indicated that his cell phone had been pinged near the Pitt Fest. There is something about the way this is kind of all culminating. I still wonder whether or not like there's another shoe to drop or something where it's like it's going to zag. But maybe I'm wrong and maybe David is the shooter and this is like a terrible tragedy and is going to define Robbie going forward on this show. Yeah, that he was like, I don't want to ruin this kid's life by calling the police in.
This show has won my trust so completely
that either way,
that I'm here. And I'm waiting to see. If I were to turn off that part of my brain briefly, I would say that I hope that it's not. It does feel a little, the basis for shows like this are that an ER, and in this case, this ER, is a window into and a perfect functioning microcosm of society, and everyone passes through its doors, and everything happens here today. Literally on the show on one day that is of significance to the world, to the society, to the city, and for the viewing audience. The sense that Robbie's worst day would spiral to this level, that he can't fix everything. I get that on a character and thematic on a whiteboard in August when you're sitting down to set out a season goals. That makes sense to me. I think it's almost too tiny town for the purposes of belief. But again, everything else about the show has been, as we've been told, incredibly accurate. So I'm willing to accept some dramatic swings for the purposes of furthering the story and furthering the development of these characters. It also does. They're so savvy about so many things, just on a meat and potatoes level, that a misdirect feels equally likely. I mean, maybe it's Doug. Maybe Doug punched Dana and then got angrier.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, that it could still be related to the emergency room, but not necessarily the kid. I think it has been established and reinforced this episode that the hospital is also near Pitfest.
Yes.
So pinging near it, who knows how accurate that might be. But I could be wrong. It could have been, we called it on episode 2, and it has not taken away from our enjoyment of the show
at all.
I
mean, I would also say that one of the things that was interesting about this episode, where essentially every frame of the 40 minutes is made up of bleeding bodies, is that the rest of the season, the previous 10 episodes or however many, trained me to be ready for this, because there was also I guess through the sheer speed through which they're moving through this, but I felt like I was gripped by it, whereas there have been a couple of procedures this year where I'm like, okay, didn't need to see that. Didn't need to see debriding.
Keep going.
Yeah, well, you're not going to help.
As a girl dad, braiding is something that's often
but what happened? There was like a skin thing earlier in the year, and I was like,
the lady on the subway tracks.
That's right. Right. She was batter up first. So that was really my takeaways. I did not think the cliffhanger, to the extent that it is one, was manipulative. I'm very excited, obviously, to find out where this is all going.
And the fate of Jake.
I wonder how long Collins is going to operate in a total media blackout at her house.
Yes. I mean, in my experience, which is completely different.
You didn't even know about the Kennedy files until I told you.
In a way, I've just been turning my phone off and taking a bath for months now. No, in my completely different experience, whenever someone has been like, you know what, take it easy, I have 100% never done that.
No.
You know,
No.
so I also.
That's when you open up your Facebook newsfeed. You get to the bottom of it.
Ooh, just hook it up. Just pull out my arm and do the reverse Dr. King.
What's going on, comicbookmovies.net?
They have some pretty wild theories for Avengers Doomsday that I have not really read you in on yet.
Yeah.
But I'm across them. I'm across these theories. Did you feel, in terms of like finding a moment to pause and focus on other storylines, I thought that the Chad crutching his way into the ER was actually pretty effective.
Yeah, because it's like, I think that's the first time he's ever really seen his wife do what she does.
Yes, and
he's like,
also
damn, she is a boss.
Again, like the one tiny nitpick area where the show sometimes has gotten its dials a little bit off has been, I think, like sometimes patients come in and they have to be at a certain setting to communicate what their function on the show is in the brief amount of time.
Like
so Chad
Myrna
was like,
or Chad,
Chad's like, I'm a dickhead all the time. That's what I do. You know what I mean? And so when he was crutching his way,
he's not though. He's like,
no, but like, you know, but he kind of was. He kind of was
in when he was like, I mean, it seems like he's a good dad.
Well, I'm trying to help your man Chad. By the way, justice for Chad. You're like the guy in the hardware store in episode 4 of Adolescence. Jeez. You're on the wrong side of history, pal. Anyway, all I want to say is that scene, because of how aggro he was in his previous iterations on the show, I did think that the show was going to just divert resources and attention to have him be like, come on, son, come on, Harrison.
And then it's like a panic about where's Harrison.
Yes, I'm taking you out if you're in the middle of this.
Too much.
For him to be humbled and stunned and just sit down to watch a movie, because that's really all he needed to do at that moment.
Picked a movie. The kid's been sitting in there for a while.
I thought the one line that they left in the cutting room floor was, should we watch a movie? And the kid's like, yeah. And Chad would have said something scary. You see what I mean? Because it's like, inside of Harrison, there are two wolves.
Dr. McKay and Chad.
Dr. McKay and this dickhead.
I would definitely be more like Chad. I would be like, first of all, we're watching Blair Witch, so let's turn the lights out.
No, you'd be like, you got Contagion on that bad boy? Let's fire it up. Fire it up, ready to go. When you watch movies on the iPad, you do Obama imitations. Did you know that?
Are you fired up?
Barry didn't release those files.
He didn't.
You got so serious.
But there was also like, I think there was like a time, and Trump fucking tried to release them once, and he was like, actually, it's all redacted.
No, the deep state stopped him.
No, I think he stopped himself. I think he's an idiot.
You
frankly.
think?
Like,
whoa! First of all, whoa! How dare you, sir, make this political? You think that his better angels took hold? What are you saying right now?
That's not what I said. I think he promises stuff, and he's like, well, you're going to see on Friday I do this, and then he's like, no.
That was like when you said you would watch a Miyazaki movie.
But I watched Porco Rosso.
First of all, you glanced at it over a 3-year-old's shoulder.
The gist, yeah.
I'm trying to get you to watch the one that's about dudes who love two things in this broken life: airplanes and smoking darts.
But isn't that what Porco Rosso is about?
I mean, that's what they're all about. But there's one specifically that doesn't have any talking animals, Wind Rises, and just about a guy who loves a lady with tuberculosis, but also loves smoking.
Does she like smoking? Because that's bad for TB.
It's a tough match. But now you see the contours of the story.
All right. I guess I know what I'm watching sometime.
You know what I'm watching? Next week's episode of The Pitt on the Warner Brothers Screener site. Moving on.
We can move on because obviously, like we've been talking about this show. I've sometimes wondered whether or not it warrants a week to week kind of conversation, but I just keep wanting to tip my cap to it. We've only got I think 4 episodes left.
I don't want to. I mean, we should tip our caps to it. It has been interesting to cover on a weekly basis because it's longer and because, as we said, some episodes they're scratching an itch. They haven't necessarily all been bravura tours de force.
Tour de forces.
Like
I don't know.
Attorneys general. Doesn't matter. This podcast machine really was built to be like, for the next 10 weeks, we're gonna have 10 distinct, interesting things to say. And
about one show.
Yeah. I don't know if we do that
I will say
anymore.
though, it's been a pleasure talking with you about this because
it's a pleasure talking to you.
I feel like it's like we do a lot of starting. I watch a lot of first episodes now.
There's so many.
It's really nice to be like in the flow with a bunch of shows right now.
Oh, I agree. And,
You know?
and particularly this kind of show, I just love it. And I think that, I don't think it's just we do this for a living kind of, not jadedness, but like that affects we are enjoying the delivery method and the style of the show as much as the show itself. But I don't think that's just a podcaster problem. I do, just from doing my Thomas Friedman back of the cab reporting with people.
That's
I think
the second time you've mentioned Thomas Friedman in at least like maybe 3
That's
episodes.
why.
Okay.
He's the new Doug from Tidal in the sense of like
Thomas Friedman back of the cab reporting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why would you explain this? You know this.
It's just like that is such a specific.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this no longer a safe space for specific references that only we get? We've been getting paychecks for dropping them for over a decade. Sir.
You get paid for this?
That's how. Do you know how many people in my life have asked me that?
I get paid to be on Rewatchables.
This is Make-A-Wish Foundation shit for me.
This doesn't even get published.
Wouldn't surprise me. Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
For those who don't
bust you up.
For those who haven't been reading The Gray Lady for as long as we have, Thomas Friedman would write these columns where he'd be like, "In the back of a taxi in Bangalore, I spoke to my driver about globalization."
Yeah.
That's kind of what
this
I do
diner
here.
in Trump country.
In an Uber.
They're having second thoughts.
I'm like, on
but
the
at
way
least they got the JFK files.
They're just pouring over them in the diner. They don't even order pancakes anymore. I think that the Pitt and the style of show that it is really is resonating. I think it's resonating in the industry too, in the sense that like even talking to people, executives, like, well, what are you watching or what are you excited about? This is the show that people are talking about.
The other show that people are talking about is Adolescence.
Yes, that's fair.
I was listening to Joe and Rob talk about it today on the Prestige, or yesterday on the Prestige TV podcast. I think today I can't remember when it went up. Joe and Rob are doing incredible Herculean work right now because they're doing Severance, White Lotus, Theories, and then they dropped an Adolescence episode. We talked about it on Monday's pod and specifically about the first episode, but broadly. I wanted to just throw out that in the beginning of Joe's pod, Joe and Rob's pod, she was talking about talking to a friend who had referred to this as the next Baby Reindeer in terms of its sensation. And Joe rightly said, like, I think Adolescence is better than Baby Reindeer, and in some ways it's not insulting to Baby Reindeer, but I think I'm inferring that that's what I think.
Insulting
to Adolescence to be like, it's the new Baby Reindeer.
I agree.
It did something like 24.5 million views over its first week of release or first weekend of release. It was just behind The Electric State on Netflix's.
You put a bullet in that one.
Well, it is kind of crazy that is like the extremes you can swing on Netflix. It's like a $320 million turkey and this very special piece of television that I'm going to think about for years to come. I have had in recent months, like kind of this experience where like, I think because of the volume of stuff that I work on, I'm like, I sometimes just forget like character names or I forget like, oh, and then that happened. And I feel like this show is like seared into my mind, you know, and it's really cool to see it take off like this because I think I'll just share a conversation I had with Van Lathan yesterday, who called me after he'd finished it and was just kind of shaken up, but also really wanted to talk about it. And he mentioned that one of the only ways, you know, he and I agreed that you can kind of hope for a better world. One of the ways you kind of can strive to have a better world or cure some of the things that are making us like collectively as a society sick is to like translate that through art. That art is a great way. And like, I think some people might hear that and think, oh, you mean like, it's not simply about casting. It's not simply about like, it's about the stories you choose to tell and the way you choose to tell them and how we're navigating a very, very dark time for everybody through art. And it's been really cool to see people respond to this, to be like, I need to know more about these things that Adolescence is about, but also be able to just relate to it as what an astonishing story told in an astonishing way with so much dignity and so much respect for the material.
There is nothing wrong with escapism, particularly in a very, very dark, very uncertain, very scary time. And it is not our place or anyone's place to judge the choices that people make when they actually get time for themselves in a broken world. Writ large, though, I do think it's possible to make the argument that that escapism as the goal of mass market entertainment has gone a little far and has overcorrected in that direction. That what we look for, or what corporations feel is worthy of $300 million, let's say, are increasingly hermetically sealed escape pods in which to lose yourself for a few hours, or to be pumped full of hopium and slowcore covers of 80s songs. Or that following passions, whether they're aesthetic or emotional, down personal rabbit holes is always the most important thing to be doing. What I find so striking, and what I find particularly jarring, like shaking in a good way, about a moment where we were talking about the Pit, and particularly about Adolescence, is that Adolescence is absolutely a work of very high art in terms of its writing, in terms of its acting, its filmmaking, its dedication to craft, but it is entirely unafraid of engaging with the world as it is. It is entirely open-minded and curious, and it is a show made by people and performers who are listeners first and foremost, and not talkers. You can tell, and we can talk about the whole series. I devoured it after having watched the first episode, and I feel even just 2 days later a little bit silly about some of the feelings that I expressed about the first episode, only because I still didn't fully understand the project. I didn't know how much time would pass between episodes, or where the camera would choose to spend its hour for the 4 hours that it had.
You could watch the first episode and be like, oh, it's going to be like this. It's going to be
it's Law and Order.
The detectives, the lawyers, the kid, the parents. It's going to maybe even be set at this station.
It's so much more empathetic. It's so much more curious. It's so much more ambitious in a lot of ways than I had anticipated. And I do want to talk specifically about some moments in the episodes. I want to talk specifically about how the third episode. We should probably do our episode of the year episode now, because I can't imagine anything topping that.
Yeah.
But the moment that I do want to hit briefly is to why I think this is just on a different tier than most of the stuff we engage with, is what I was joking about at the start, which is there's a van ride in the fourth episode where we've already had some pretty strong emotions, blood running hot.
We can do spoilers. So the remaining family of Jamie's family. So his father, his mother, and his sister.
It's Eddie's 50th birthday.
Yeah.
And the day has started promisingly and then been radically redirected with some insulting graffiti, what appears to be permanently sprayed in his van. They cannot get rid of the stain. The metaphor is quite strong. And he, instead of having the full English breakfast / heart attack that his wife is lovingly preparing for him, he makes everyone get in the van with him to drive essentially to Home Depot to get something to wash the van. And Stephen Graham's performance, Wainwright's, related to Adam, I imagine. This is family business.
Opened a series of hardware stores in Yorkshire.
He did. Yadier Molina was like, "What are you doing?" to his battery mate. And he's like, "No,
that is a great cut.
I'm seeing the vision.
Yeah,
these people need to get their paints." Anyway, the van ride, because the show is a oneer, we go the whole way with them, and I presumably he's driving the van. His performance is one for the ages.
That was apparently the hardest one they shot. Was the one that would produce the most technical complications
because of the driving.
Because I think it was we can only do this so many times, and
because they had to shut down multiple places to have it.
Imagine. Yeah.
Anyway, in that van, you see. God, what a performance! You see him.
Their life stories are told there,
and you see it, but you also see him doing what everyone has to do at some point in their lives, often a lot, which is grab the wheel of yourself and really try and turn it. Against fate and circumstance and emotion and just try.
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to be present. He's saying like, let's just do something. Let's climb a hill. Let's go ice skating. Then they go to the pictures. And then all of a sudden they're talking about high school dance and they're laughing and they're in love. And the daughter's performance, I'll call up these people's names so we can call them out, is so beautiful and present because she's radiating absolute embarrassment, but also love that she's just in the midst of. The show finds time for that. The show considers life. The show, in its 4 hours, considers the totality of life more than many shows do in multiple seasons. And I found that so moving and so riveting to watch. It was just the absolute best expression, like on a microscopic level, of it's the casual anecdote that we talk about when we've talked about The Leftovers, or I probably wrote about back in the day. But that Damon Lindelof said when he was on the podcast years ago, that the difference between season 1 of The Leftovers and season 2 is that he remembered people laugh at funerals.
Mm-hmm.
And it unlocks, this isn't a show about death, this is a show about life. And life can sometimes be fucking awful in ways that, I think many of the viewers aren't even prepared to understand or accept. But the show contains all of it. And I can't get over it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a moment in that. I keep thinking about how they must have made this show. Obviously, a lot of it probably derived from really intense research. I saw an interview with Stephen Graham and Jack Thorne, who wrote the series, where they were talking about how Owen Cooper, who plays Jamie, would help them with the dialogue because he would say it's not exactly how like a teenager now would say it, and they would be like, "Then tell us, like you're a teen." If this isn't his first job, it's one of his first jobs. I was astonished to find out that the third episode was the first one that they shot. So that is essentially like Owen Cooper coming in, and that's his rookie season right there. But the sophistication of the writing is something I wanted to hit on with you a little bit, because I think that there are ideas that are echoed throughout the series very subtly and never at the expense of what is actually on screen, distracting and being like, okay, we're going to take a detour so that we can have, if anything, maybe the second episode does a little bit of this, but does a little bit of that. But for the most part, one of the ideas that I really kept coming back to was something that Faye Marseille's detective character, Misha, says in the second episode, where she said, all kids really need is one thing that makes them feel good about themselves. And she's talking about a teacher that she had that was really important to her and kind of saved her when she was in a school much like the one that Jamie was in. And, you think about in the fourth episode, I hope you don't mind if we just jump around.
No,
I don't know if we need to do episode by episode breakdowns, but in the fourth episode, when Amanda and Eddie, the parents, are kind of reckoning with whether they could have done anything differently and why Jamie turned out the way he did.
Yep.
And they're kind of going through this list of things that Jamie wasn't good at.
Yep. The different phases,
Soccer,
the different versions
boxing,
of himself.
Kind of picked up drawing.
Then he was good at that.
But then the thing that he was good at, or the thing where he found himself, was what is apparently the worst possible place for a kid that age to be, which is the internet. And he got a computer and he holed up in there. And the description that she has of walking by his room at 1 a.m. and hearing or seeing the computer light still on.
And let's say Christine Tremarco.
Yeah.
And her performance in 4 is, Aaron Doherty and Stephen Gray, they're going to get the headlines, but I think her performance in 4 is
I was really interested. Graham and Tremarco have known each other and grew up in Liverpool. Like, their coupledom in this show kind of mirrors their biography. Although Hannah Walters is actually Stephen Graham's partner, and she appears briefly in 2 as the counselor
with Jade,
talking to Jade, and she can also be seen in 1,000 Blows, and she was part of the creative team behind 1,000 Blows.
So I didn't want to cut you off. You were talking about that moment when the mother talks about going by the room with the light off.
Yeah,
and
just
the distance and the doors,
and just the idea that I think this show does a really good job of being like, life is a kind of a roulette wheel, and that you need to have like one person recognize your goodness and also your kind of purpose and your value, and give you dignity and give you a sense of like, okay, I can do something on this planet.
There's so much in that. There is, the show holds space, if you'll excuse the modern parlance, for a lot of possibilities. And the 4th episode really brings a lot of that home. Lisa is the daughter's name.
Yeah.
And her name, Amelie Peace is the actress. She's amazing in it, I think, in a very subtle way. There is a strong implication that Lisa is just okay, that she has turned out okay with many of the same circumstances.
She's
as
in college.
Jamie.
She has a boyfriend, I think. Yeah.
But that she, and there's a very crucial line near the end of the episode where he said, "What did we do differently to make that?" And we didn't do anything differently. So I do think that what the show does, again, it's holding two things in its mind or in its creative brain at the same time. That nature and nurture are sometimes ineffable and unknowable and untrackable, and you can't overcorrect for anything. That said, the nurture part becomes crucial because you were saying that he found maybe the thing that he was good at. I would argue that the communication there is that he was doing things and then he quit, because the computer or social media or phones is the illusion of doing things. It's the illusion of value. It's the illusion of connection. It's the illusion of purpose, and it eats people out from the inside.
I mean, there's so much stuff there to even that conversation where he, in the 4th episode, where Eddie is talking about, he's like, my father used to beat the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And I was never going to be like that
better
to him. And I don't think he's like, what I needed to do was be harder and hit Eddie or hit Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see him kind of grappling with the idea that maybe whether it was being permissive or whether it was the fact that they were busy with their own lives and trying to make a living to try and keep the household running, that they thought he was safe because he was home.
That is a bedrock thing here. But there's also a really, and I think this is so hard to do, and not many shows do it, even shows that have the best intentions or have the creators who have done the most therapy. But like, all of us are just collections of our pasts, our traumas, our histories, and our best intentions. And that scene in the bedroom is so crucial and not a moment too long. It's beautifully played, because the takeaway is he did do his best, not only considering where he came from, but what he tried to do, what he attempted to connect over. And one of the most searing things that I won't forget from the show is, and this is true, I think, in our lives too, every moment is important to everyone. The sense that, I didn't even realize that this person in my life was upset at X moment, or that would have sent them spiraling. If you're present and you're paying attention, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Jamie's meltdown in 3, which really just comes down to the most searing thing anyone can ask anyone, let alone a child to an adult, which is like, do you like me? That the moment that he shared, even after saying he didn't want to talk about his father, was that he'll never forget his father turning his face away.
Which his father then tells the same story. He was like, I was ashamed of him. I turned away from him.
They both would never forget that moment, but neither would talk about it. And that breakdown of communication is as essential as the breakdown in communication between the genders in a junior high. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was a significant moment, but we, men, people, anyone, don't talk about that stuff.
One of the things that I thought was fascinating was every character, with the exception of Jamie, and his little shit friends. Every character, with the exception of like some of those kids, is essentially asking the same question, which is, why would somebody do this? And that was the motivating factor for Stephen Graham to get involved with this project in the first place. He had read about a series of knife crimes in England and was just like, why is this happening? Why are kids this young turning to such extreme violence? And I think Jack Thorne also brought the element of toxic online discourse and the manosphere and Andrew Tate and all that stuff. But all these characters are asking why, and they're asking why in different ways, and they're asking why for different reasons. So in 2, there are detectives who are searching for a reason why we have kind of like, they've found themselves looking in a school for the reasons for a young child murdering another child.
And looking for the weapon.
Yeah, and looking for the weapon and kind of getting a little bit more versed in what the internet commentary, the social media commentary.
What emojis mean.
Yeah. And then you get to 3, and Erin Doherty's Briony character is asking why to some extent. But her responsibility is to ultimately for the justice system and for the legal, like the process, his legal process. And she makes that clear to him multiple times, but especially explicitly and perhaps heartbreakingly in the very end of the episode where she just turns off. You know, like
she's there.
Now she heard what she heard, and I think it breaks her heart. But she is like, this was our last session. I hope you take advantage of the mental health services.
Yeah. Everyone's there, as the detective says, the DI says in the first episode. Everyone's just trying to do their best here.
And then you get to the fourth episode, and it's the parents who are trying to figure out why. You know, what did we do that led to this? I want to talk to you a little bit about 3. You talked about it being likely the best episode, but did you want to jump in?
I do want to talk about 3. And I want to talk about it in terms of just broadly, this is everything that I want in TV. This is like built on also such an incredible tradition, I think, especially in the UK, of theater, of kitchen sink drama, of actors being prepared to show up and do the work.
Also, television made with an eye towards being for the public good, that it does a service to tell stories like this and to kind of show real life. Yeah.
That said, there's levels of specificity and craftsmanship in the theme that I do want to call out before we get into some of the more the other specifics of episode 3. But it was in 3 that I really noticed it, and I also want to caveat this by saying it is rich for 2 men of a certain age, talking about a show created by essentially 3 men of a certain age. But I do want to, I from my limited perspective, I was fascinated and really compelled by what the show did subtly about gender. And the way that roles are rejected or assumed or played with throughout. I think that for as absolutely devastating as Aaron Doherty's performance is and the way that episode is shaped, I think that the presence of the security guard in that episode is as important as everything else. I texted you the guy's name, and I feel bad that I don't have it in front of me. Douglas Roberts, plays a guy named Victor who sort of helps her in and is there like, I'm always watching. And it could be a nothing part, but there are no nothing parts in theater or in a show like this. And he is sort of an affable Scotsman who is just maybe a little too friendly and maybe just stands a little too closely and comes up a little too near when she's looking at his screen and shares a little too much.
There's so much in their brief relationship. I was thinking about how at some point while he's kind of talking to her about in one of her moments outside of the interview room, he's talking to her about, she says, I love my job.
Yeah.
And he's like, I fucking hate mine.
And in TV.
And it was the idea that like she chose to be a child therapist. This was probably the job he could get.
Yes.
And he's been stuck in it for,
And he's interested, but he's also resentful. And there's a little flavor of toxicity to it.
Yeah, when he's talking about the body language book that he's been reading and he's standing a little too close to her. Yeah.
And some of that is echoed when Jamie is like, you're posh. And he talks about her body. Yeah. And she is under the barrage of that all the time, we understand, but also particularly in her workplace. And she has to put on different faces that only crack at the end. There are different. I think that TV generally, when we talk about what is built episode to episode or cumulatively, it's often in terms of plot. Like, this storyline or this scene was an important piece of plot armor or building block for where the season was going. On a show like this or in theater, nothing is wasted, right? Everything has to be significant. That's why, it's a cliche now, but that's why we talk about Chekhov's gun. And I think that every moment of the show, every even minor interaction is significant for understanding the psychological world that the show exists in, which is essentially our world. And so I was thinking about Victor and Brianne's presence and their scene when we got a rare moment of only women on the screen. In episode 4, when Manda, who's Jamie's mother, is with Lisa and she's asking about her boyfriend and she's asking if she's fine. And her mother says, is he taking care of you?
Yeah.
And she means that from her generation's perspective in a, I think, loving way. And her daughter is like, I don't need to be taken care of. It's the same look on Jamie's face when Brianne says, does your dad have any women friends?
He's like, no, he has mates.
No, first she says, no, he loves my mom.
Yeah.
It's just not what? And there's a lurking second question that Brianne doesn't ask in 3 that haunts me when she's asking him, what would you do if you went on a date? Or what would you... And there's there's this emptiness there where you realize that whether it's his age, whether it's generational, whether it's because of the fucking internet, the thought that he would take any emotional interest or personal interest or just like let's have fun and be friends interest in a woman or a girl is impossible to conceive of. He was like, this is a means to an end. And the end, then she gets into in very anatomical details of what that end would be. And he lies about it.
Yeah.
You know, there is the heavy curtain thrown over everything of the gendered relationships, even in the cops when he's like, do you want children? That's not something you ask a coworker.
I think she says, you've never asked me that before. Yeah.
People aren't talking. People aren't asking. People aren't expressing themselves. And we just see the ripples.
Yeah.
And they're not all knife attacks. You know, I think the totality of that, I'm still grappling with just how thoughtful every single detail in the show is.
Yeah. There's also, I mean, there are shades of a traditional cop show in this. You know, I think maybe even some of the hesitation you might have had coming out of one was, are we looking at like kind of a broad church situation where maybe that's not him on the video?
Yes.
Or, you know, like, is this a miscarriage of justice?
Is the lawyer a main character now?
Is the lawyer a main character now? And I thought that was the most fascinating thing about 3, too. Episode 3 as well, for me, was this was not. I mean, there's parts of that episode that remind me of Silence of the Lambs. You know, like there's parts of it that are like Clarice interviewing Hannibal. And I don't mean that to say that like a character like Jamie is the same thing as this sort of supernaturally villainous, you know, person, but uncovering where people's responsibilities start and end. And her sort of being like, well, you know, maybe your father modeled poor life skills, masculinity to you. And then when she gets him to the point where he obviously is having a complete dissonance between what he actually did and what he thinks he's in trouble for.
Right.
Which is essentially like where she turns off the the machine for herself. Because he's saying, I could have done all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But I only
killed her.
And she's like, do you understand what death is? And I think everybody on the show, all the adults on this series, are horrified by the idea that there may be a generation of people who, because they are interacting with certain levels of information before their brains are fully formed, might not understand certain things. Like, that person's never coming back. You're going to jail for the rest of your life for what you did. You know? And he's in the beginning, he's like, I'm in this madhouse. These kids are screaming during Coronation Street. Like, you have to get me out of here.
Yeah. I don't belong here.
Yeah.
I don't belong here because I know these things, but not these other things.
But he's essentially having blackout rage moments every 10 minutes in that 3rd episode.
When he asks for another hot chocolate, you're like, this is a child. And something, again, like, there's such a tendency in, I mean, especially American things, to be honest, but maybe it's just where we are with most art, but like to make things feel okay or make things feel a little bit better or to take the sting out of it. I mean, it's not a one-to-one, but it's the thing I think you articulated really well on the big picture when you were talking about the Chewbacca problem. Being serious, like it's a slightly different version of that. But the show holds space for the possibility that something is broken in Jamie, not just broken in society, which it definitely suggests. It doesn't run away from the ambiguity of not really ever knowing, and that people are just going to be left weeping, unable to get their arms around any sense of truth or understanding. I mean, we're talking about it. I'm just more and more little choices and details are uncovering, and like the 2 different teachers we encounter in episode 2. There's the guy who's
Mr. Malik,
who's just like, I'm a zookeeper essentially, and what do you want from me? And then the other guy who's Adam's teacher, who has the demeanor of a drill sergeant.
Yes.
These are extremes, but these are also, in some ways, you know, understandable reactions to impossible situations.
Yeah, it's also just like, you know, you watch like those kids interact and you're just like, please tell me this is an exaggeration. When the kid is like throwing Adam up against the wall and is like, give me £1.20. And then the teacher's like, leave him alone. And he's like, you give me £1.20 then? Like, I'm like, oh shit.
What can you get with £1.20 these days?
I don't know.
I mean, in my experience, not very much.
Yeah.
But what does Stephen Graham say? Can't even buy a pint with a $5 anymore.
That's true.
That is true.
Talk to you a little bit about we could go on and on. I wanted to talk to you just briefly about the filmmaking because I think that some people are like, well, does it need to be this way? And I resoundingly answer yes. I think
I do too.
Even if I can't always make a case for this is why they needed to do this, I think there are some things that are just really cool, like going through the window, in the chase or, the drone shot
that lifts up out of school and then lands
There's
at the
some
flowers.
Just amazing flexes. I think that I just think a lot about where director Philip Barantino wants you to look. And sometimes it's his choice, as in 3, where there will be long times where he's on Jamie.
But he's always pushing. He's always
pushing and pulling, and then there will be points where Brianny's talking, but we're watching Jamie listen, or Jamie's talking and we're watching Brianny listen, which is usually the reverse of what you would do in a coverage. Point. Then there are times like the 4th episode of what is essentially like a 15-minute scene of them in the front of the van as they drive to the Home Depot or the Wainwrights, where you're forced to look at all of the people in the scene at once. It's like essentially a master. Not only are you, it's not a fun driving scene where you're like, oh, I can see all the stuff in the back. You're right on their windshield. And it's like, these 2 people are basically telling their daughter the story of their lives. The daughter is just like, I'm on my phone. I don't want to do this.
But also, this is giving me life.
Yeah. And then they reach this sort of ecstasy of playing Aha, reliving their own teenage years, their love.
Thinking about the takeaway. They're going to
go to a Chinese. And then essentially the second they walk into the store,
it crashes.
But I think following everything gives you this sense of continuity that I think is very important to the show.
It speaks to, I agree completely. It speaks to, I hope, what I was trying to articulate before about life contains all of it. You cannot.
Life's boring sometimes.
Life is boring. Life is driving between places. Life is putting on a happy face. Life is smiling to your neighbor, but actually calling her
a cow.
Life is going as Eddie's birthday goes, from like trying to have a quick one with your wife before your daughter wakes up and enjoying breakfast to getting a card from your incarcerated child.
Yeah.
Like it just keeps happening. And the fact that it is an aesthetic and bold directorial choice, as well as a deeply, deeply story-based, compelling narrative choice, is really special. I think it's really unique. I think that when people who work in the industry talk about how it's a miracle anything ever gets made, let alone anything good, it's because A, they're aware of all the things that can go wrong and all the bumps along the way. But they're also aware of the fact that getting so many people work on a production, getting all of them to more or less row in the same direction from beginning to end is borderline impossible. And sometimes those disconnects happen early when like an executive buys something that is just fundamentally different than what the writer wants to write, or it's a casting decision, the actor doesn't agree. This was a uniquely collaborative process because Stephen Graham is the star. He's also the co-creator, co-writer. With Jack Thorne, you were saying like the actors were allowed to bring parts of themselves to it. Yeah,
there's also obviously like
and Philip
Graham's
Barantini
worked with Doherty earlier. He's worked
and Barantini.
With,
it is an intimate company that knew each other. Again, that reminds me of more of a theater troupe than a production. But the fact that every single creative person involved was rowing in the same direction from the beginning, and that everything was in service of everything else, so that the camera is playing the long game, like running the same marathon that the actors are running. It is not sprinting a lot to show off or to get noticed or to mug for the cameras in the same way that like the actors, the camera's on them for so long, they can't hide.
Yeah.
Nothing about them can hide. I mean, I don't think it's not just that we don't have the time. I don't think we have the qualifications to really sit here and talk about what makes Aaron Doherty's performance or Stephen Graham's performance as absolutely transcendent as they are, other than the fact that is what, if you Google acting, like being present moment to moment in the given circumstance is what acting ought to be and what it can be, and what we rarely see it be for these sustained bursts of time
also,
on
it's
TV.
like, think about, I had one last thing I wanted to ask you about, but think about going back through these episodes and watching things happen knowing what you know, right? Like, so that first episode, I did not read about this show before I watched it. I just knew that it was like really taking on a lot of momentum. So I watched that in complete sympathy with Jamie. I watched it being like,
the indignities
oh
of
my
it.
God, like this poor child crying in this van. And obviously the police officers seem to have a bit of sympathy for him as well. And like everybody's like, I hate juvenile cases. And I was like, oh, right. So maybe what this show is going to be is like, how could this have gone so wrong?
Well, and you're anticipating the twist, which is what TV has taught us to do.
Right.
He's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the story is much more
complicated. It was actually Ryan who did it. Yeah, right. And
or it was really Eddie who did it, covering
yeah.
for his kid. Or
I mean, that's what Broadchurch is, right? Like, I mean, like that's what these other shows have taught us.
Presumed innocent is.
And then the same thing for the third episode is when you realize what Aaron Doherty's character is essentially there to ascertain or to sort of identify, which is to what level does this kid understand what he did? And when she finds out in all the wrong ways he does, and all the, you know, like you go back and watch her approach and the intensity with which she's going up in the elevator. Again, really little moment, but the guy in the elevator being like, "Oh, do you work here?" Like, you know, kind of like always being flirted with. And it's just like, it actually is a durable rewatch in that way. I mean, obviously not a fun one, but it is very durable. I wanted to ask you about one moment that I think I'll remember for a long time, if not the rest of my life, which is Jamie calling his dad in the car on his birthday and telling him that he's changing his confession to guilty and his plea. And that there's just that moment again that goes back to picking his dad as his adult for the interviews, but he's obviously alarmed that his mother and sister were also on the phone call. He finds out that they're all in the car. This is another example of like this one take not cutting is we never see Jamie's face again after we leave from episode 3. I mean, what did you think of that last moment? Those last moments.
I mean, it's excruciating. It does speak to the point we were discussing before about like gendered spaces. He says this to his father. We don't, again, like talk about a rewatch. We don't know verbatim why. He's asked a few times why he's chosen his father to be this. Stephen Graham wrestles with why, Eddie wrestles with why he was chosen, whether he's up for it. And it's particularly because it goes from a feeling of my father understands me and doesn't judge me to the revelation that that the searing humiliation of Jamie's life is his father judging and rejecting him.
Yeah.
So it does suggest that he is almost daring his father to keep loving him. You know, that there's an element of escalation.
Well, it seems like he's also sticking to this idea that he didn't do it in various ways over the course of the 13 months of the process, right?
And is it because he can't accept it, as you said, cognitively, that what has happened here, or is it that he can't accept that his father knows that he did that? Like it's layers on layers, right? But I would also say, and this was a question that I had, I didn't Google this. I don't feel like it was baked into the show. I didn't understand the consequences for the rest of his life if he changed the plea.
I don't either.
He's a juvenile when he's arrested. Is he tried as an adult? Is he
the kid in the Wainwright seems to suggest that this case has become like kind of a true crime sensation on the internet, and that like
and a cause celeb for men's rights.
Yeah, right. Right.
So that the sense is that if he fought it, he could win the headlines. Or
I don't know.
But does this give him peace and closure? Does it shorten his sentence? We don't actually know. And so I think that the beauty of it is that we don't know. That what you'd like to think what he was doing is giving peace and closure to his family. And what the show does for us is it gives us that information purely as an emotional chit, not in any way as like gamesmanship for the legal drama that it never became. And it is so devastating, right? That Eddie stopped speaking, and his wife and Jamie's mother and sister fill in the silence, which upsets.
Like, is the food okay?
Upsets Jamie. They can never really talk about the things anymore. And there are moments when losing yourself within this world in terms of the small things, like he's still a kid, he should get his cornflakes, he should get his hot chocolate, feels like humane.
Yeah.
As opposed to, do you understand what death is? Both exist at the same time.
Yeah.
What aspect of that moment haunts you the most? Is it the effect that the words have on Eddie, or the effect that the words have on his, at that moment, honestly traumatized mother and sister who have just had this moment seeing their father have a rage, throw the bicycle, splatter the paint?
I think I brought it up more as like an example of why I think the filmmaking choice is the right for the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that in each episode, we're very much with the POV of one or two characters. I think in 2, it's mostly either Detective Bascom or his son. Adam, I think, gets a few moments of his own, but it's more or less following one of the two of them. In episode 3, it's entirely Brittany. In episode 4, it's entirely Eddie and Amanda. So like it's a very like limited POV, and I think that forces you to live in information as it's processed by characters rather than the way it's processed by the audience. And I thought that was really, really beautiful in some ways, just to experience that.
There's a sense, right, that like you said it at the beginning of our conversation last week, something that I loved hearing, that I agree with, which is that Jack Thorne, the writer and creator, describes TV as an empathy box, right? It's just, it allows us multiple perspectives. It's in our home. It's very intimate. The camera is the tool of that box. I'm losing my analogy, but the camera isn't, in my opinion, what's beautiful about it in filmmaking is that it is our window into another world. It is what connects the artists with the audience. And it is a gift to show people what to look at, right? And to help them through a story or a world. There's a flip side of that, and I don't begrudge it, because people should be challenged technically or artistically, where the camera is like a performance tool. It's like a new pair of Hokas or whatever. It's like, I'm going to use this to show the limits, or blow past the limits of what you perceive my abilities to be.
Yeah.
I am going to bend this story to my camera and show you what I was able to do technically. And I am generally allergic to that, because I am always more interested in the characters and the stories than I am in
the style
or the technical specs. It was, for me, thrilling to see, again, everyone rowing in the same direction here, where Philip Berendini's opinion of why it's a wonder and what the camera can be used for was in line with, aesthetically and emotionally, with what you were saying, Stephen Graham, why Stephen Graham wanted to tell this story. I want to know why. Well, okay, so Stephen Graham's...
How is this happening? Why is this happening? Yeah.
And what does it look like? What could it feel like? And Stephen Graham's curiosity led him to both co-write this, but also to give all of himself in an absolutely soul-searing performance.
I mean, the last shot is...
Come on. Philip Berendini is like, I'm also curious. What are my tools to tell this story? And it's awesome. I mean, there are... Everything is a different brush in the...
a different paint in the palette, maybe.
Different arrow in the paintbrush in the quiver.
Different tool in the toolbox, brother.
Yeah, man. It's just awesome. I think also, we were recording on Wednesday. There's a piece on Deadline. Jack Thorne gave an interview talking about like British television needs to fund shows like this and make shows like this, and making the point that like, thank God Netflix picked this up because it wasn't cheap. But that, it's going around all over, that there is a turn away from, I mean, this is elite, but an even attempt to do stories like this without Trojan horsing it inside of a larger mystery box or genre or whatever. The fact that the show is as good as it is, and as apparently as successful as it is, gives me some hope.
Yeah, I've kind of lost my capacity to be scandalized anymore by the news necessarily, but there was something about the show that stopped me in my tracks. And it's not about any particular one issue or another. It's more broadly like thinking about being connected to people. And
well, it's trying.
Yeah.
That's also, I mean, this is the most emo part of the show, but we're not saying that 4 hours on Netflix are combating or taking down the manosphere or the problems in society. But these people involved were curious, and they are trying to do something. And honestly, in a very empty world of signifying and reposting, like that effort and that integrity
of the people making
of the
show,
people
yeah.
making the show
Yeah.
stands out, and it matters. And it should be a call to action,
Yeah.
honestly, for a creative community to engage with the world as it is.
I'm the one reading the papers, man.
So you tell me what other shows are referencing the news, because I don't know.
Greenwald, great to see you. We'll be back on Monday.
Yeah, we will. There'll be a Severance finale.
Yep.
There'll be a White Lotus episode 6.
Yeah, and I'd like to hit some of these Philly shows.
I want to hit the Philly shows too, but thank
Deli
you.
Boy's quite funny, quite engaging, and I really enjoyed Dope Thief so far. So I can't wait to talk about it.
Look at the little breadcrumbs you
Yeah,
dropped at the
you know
end.
what? Dope Thief wasn't what I was expecting, but in a good way.
I'm getting on a plane and I'm gonna download Dope Thief.
Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of on brand to fly to Philly and listen to watch Dope Thief.
I think it's gonna really make me feel at home. Make me feel really
thanks to
comfortable.
Kaya. Thanks to everybody. We'll be back on Monday.